Welcome to Weird PVD, the podcast. Every week, your host, Sheri Kasprzak, takes you to the odd corners of beautiful Providence, Rhode Island. From big blue bugs to unique art, from weird history to weird food, you'll never look at Rhode Island's creative capital the same again. Tune in every Weird Wednesday. So, riddle me this, PVD weirdos. What is it about Halloween that makes ghost stories so much fun? And why, oh why, do we love having the living crap scared out of us? Is it just me? I can't be the only one who loves hearing other people's nightmare horror stories, especially this time of year. But if you are like me and you love a good scary tale, well, today's episode of Weird PVD, the podcast, is just for you. I have reached into the murky depths of Reddit and pulled out some prickly, creepy tales that might just have you sleeping with the nightlight on. And Weird PVD is all about community. I want to hear your haunting stories. You can connect with me over on Instagram. I am at weird_PVD. And now you can post your own stories over at Reddit at r/weirdpvd. I have my own Reddit board, y'all. With that being said, let the hauntings begin. Just kidding, I'm back. Now really, let's let the hauntings begin. Reddit user Citrus Mystic says, I lived in a haunted house on Lafayette Street, 1 block into Pawtucket from the east side. I had 5 roommates at the time. We were on the top 2 floors. The landlord at the time and her partner occupied the first floor. For some reason, the way everyone's schedules worked out, I would regularly find myself being the only one in the house between both units. When I was alone, I would often hear someone walking around the house on the other floors. I would usually hear this during the day, but there was one night that, yet again, I find myself alone in the house. My room is on the top floor. I started hearing the disembodied footsteps in the house. Normally, when this happens, I can't really make out where they're coming from. But this time, they sounded closer, like they're coming from my unit, but I'm definitely alone in the house. I try to just dismiss it as the house settling and pretend I'm not hearing what I'm hearing. For some context, there was a really loud, creaky step toward the top of the staircase that would make a snapping/cracking sound when someone stepped on it. The footsteps are wandering, and then it sounds like they're slowly starting to come up the stairs to the top floor. After ignoring the apparently approaching footsteps for a few moments, I hear that loud crack from that step at the top of the stairs, and I officially get spooked. I try to feel better and think rationally. I make a big show of dismissing what I had heard. I turn to my big fat orange tabby cat and I proclaim, "Cat, I'm just being a silly goose. There's nothing out there. Look." And I swung open my bedroom door to reveal an empty hallway. But then I turned back to my cat, who was looking down the hallway, and you not, he puffed up all of his fur, then turned away from my door in preparation to flee, looked once over his shoulder back down the hallway, and then ran to my bed and faced the door, all puffy and jumpy. He had never done something like that randomly before, not at all. That was enough for me. I lost it. I started yelling, "Go away, leave me alone, don't come anywhere near me, stay away from my room. You are not welcome on this floor. Fuck off. Go away." I slammed the door closed. Then I proceeded to put on my headphones and blast music while distracting myself by keeping my attention on some nonsense on my laptop, likely Reddit. Eventually, I needed to use the bathroom, which was down the hallway, past the stairs. I worked up my nerve and do my best to pretend that never happened. When I reached the bathroom, I looked out the window that overlooked our driveway and noticed one of my roommate's cars was gone. She had gone with another roommate to run an errand and left her car here. I thought, oh my God, did Dee do something like come inside the apartment to get her keys when she came back for her car? And I just screamed at her to get the F out. I immediately texted her and asked if she came inside when she returned from her errand to get her car. She said no one went inside. Our other roommate dropped her off and she went straight to her car. I had other minor things happen at that apartment, but that was the main thing that kind of freaked me out. I also had an ex who lived in one of the renovated mill buildings turned into condos, the one on Dexter Street. That building, or at least his apartment, was haunted, but whatever was there wasn't a spooky jerk. They would just make a racket in the kitchen at night occasionally and move things around. Never got a bad vibe. On to the next story from Reddit user QTF Sniper. This is going to sound absolutely crazy, but I swear I'm a well grounded 24-year-old. I don't seek out the paranormal or anything like that whatsoever, but this thread was perfect for it. I live in Pawtucket, and when I was about 18, my space was the basement of a house that I'm at now. My computer was down there along with a couch. Usually, I would be up late hours and just rest on the couch because I was too lazy to go up into my room. Two experiences stand out loudly. The first one, it was around 9:30, 10-ish at night, and I was laying down after playing some Counter-Strike. Computer was off and the lights were off in the basement. All of a sudden, I hear this faint music, and as I would listen in, I could hear that it was coming from the basement too. It was definitely unsettling, but wasn't too scary since it was just music box music. I ran upstairs to where the family was, and of course, they heard nothing. This happened 2 or 3 more times afterwards. In moments of dead silences in the basement, when I would lay down on the couch, I would hear the music box. The second one, this one is frightening, and I could remember it like it was yesterday. Again, I was in the basement, but this time I was sleeping. After I was done gaming slash slacking off on the computer, I went to bed on the couch. Now, it had a blanket on it since I enjoyed sleeping down there, since it was dramatically colder at night. My computer was turned off. Important. The computer was at a desk, and next to the desk, separated by a pole, was the couch. Imagine that they're all sitting on a line, just pretty much next to each other. I head to bed and I fall asleep. I'm going to estimate the time, but it was around 2 or 3 a.m. when I woke up. The next thing I see, I'll never forget. I open my eyes, and about 5 feet away from my body, on the other side of the computer desk, facing directly at me, staring at me, was a form. It has the shape of a person, but it was glowing heavily and it was floating. The bottom half didn't look like feet, about where the legs start. It almost started to look like loose fabric that was cut. I couldn't make out any details other than the glowing white form and eyes. Every hair on my body instantly stood on edge. My body goes into panic mode. I can't move, not even a millimeter. Instantly, the blanket goes over my head in a panic, and I'm breathing hard. I can't even make a sound out of fear. I had to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Did I somehow leave the computer on? My mind rationalized that maybe there was a white web page on the screen and it was emitting that monitor glow. Problem was that the figure was about 5 to 6 feet tall and on the other side of where the monitor would be facing, opposite a desk. I slowly peeked my head out, extremely slowly. It was still there, looking at me. Back under I went, trying to figure out what I could do. I couldn't run upstairs. That meant I would have to run right through it. I stayed and hid, and under there, like that cloth wall was going to just hide me from it. Eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up at around 7:30 in the morning and instantly ran downstairs. But I had to see one thing. My computer was off, and I never slept down there again. Only told that story to my close friends. On to the next story. From Reddit user Danny says, just got home from work. to hear my girlfriend let out one of the most bone-chilling screams, like she was in a struggle. I haven't heard her scream like that in my life, and it obviously scared the shit out of me. She told me to call 911. We ran outside thinking someone was in our place, yet there was nothing. We had witnessed our attic door slash egress go from being open about 3/4 of the way to slamming shut with a pretty big force right above her head. Now, I hate bringing up the cliche of the east side being haunted, yet my girlfriend swears that the egress couldn't have been opened any other way than someone doing it on purpose. And I can't agree more. Are there any stories around the Hope Street, Olney Street area? Any way to look up an extensive history on a home? We live on the third floor of a house that was built in 1920. I'm extremely doubtful of anything, but I'm itching to look it up out of curiosity. So I thought I would ask you weirdos on Reddit. Edit. I gave everyone upvotes for dealing with such a ridiculous post. Gotta ask this question in the most haunted US city, though. Now, this one comes from r/ghost from user one Guthrie. Hey everyone, I'm sorry for the lateness. I wanted to continue telling my story about my brother's home. I've just been traveling and haven't had time until now, but getting back to my brother's creepy house. Just to get down to brass tacks, my brother lives in a 200-year-old house in East Providence. Old town, old neighborhood. In fact, the basement of his home has one wall, which is nothing but stone from an older foundation. Kind of creepy down there too. One doesn't want to be down there alone for long doing laundry. They actually live off of an older road, Route 44 in Rhode Island, that's considered New England's Bermuda Triangle. So weird stuff around there. Anywho, getting back to my story, I was sitting in the morning about like 7, 8-ish in the morning, because I'm a morning person, and I was watching TV with my then fiance. My brother and his partner Don were still asleep. Things often go bump around there, so I didn't think anything of it, but in my peripheral vision, I saw something off to my left. So I looked to my left and saw this dude, and it was only for a split second, and then he jerked back behind the wall. It was kind of like a hide and seek kind of thing. So at first I thought it was Don, and I said, "Okay, Don, I see you." And with that, I stood up and tried to follow him because I thought legitimately it was Don trying to tease me because I'm scared of his house. So I turned the corner and nothing. And then I turned the corner to the kitchen, nothing. Keep in mind, this is an old house and it creaks when you walk. And I heard nothing as I was trying to follow the image. As I got to the kitchen, again empty, and Nathan and Dawn's room was closed. So thinking they're scaring me, I knock on the door and open it. And of course, they're asleep in bed and I've just woken them. So needless to say, OMG, I flip out and I have to get out of that house. So I walk my happy ass to Dunkin' Donuts. Later on, I'll tell more stories about that house, but after 3 years, the dude finally showed himself to me. Kind of weird, eh? And now we've got a couple of more stories from Citrus Mystic from the r/ghost subreddit. I worked in a Dunkin' Donuts where I experienced 2 weird things I couldn't explain. Because of the setting, I don't think it could get any more Rhode Island than a Dunkin'. Anyway, this is out in Scituate, which the locals will tell you is full of plenty of ghost stories. It's an old town. This is the Dunkin' on the corner of 101 and Route 6. Supposedly, crossroads can attract energies, or so my mother has said. We have an archetypal woman in white ghost who is seen walking along the side of the highway. Hell, a few of the locals think there's a Bigfoot in the reservoir land. The house The Conjuring was inspired by is one town over, but I digress. I used to work the night shift, and I tended to work with one of two other women. Both of them were a bit more attuned with psychic energies than the average Jane. Also, I should note that both of these occurrences happened after we had locked the dining room and were only serving via the drive-through. So it's just myself and one other person in the building. Story one. I was working with a single mom who I'll call Alice. Alice is tiny and feisty and an amazing mom. She actually lived within view of the Dunkin at the time, which was the main reason she took up the night shift there for some extra income. If her kids ever needed her, she was right there. Alice was also Wiccan and one of the more psychic ladies I mentioned, and she had actually seen the local woman in white. It was an hour or so until we were closed. Alice and I had locked the dining room for the night and were doing our nightly closing work. I was cleaning out the donut display and she was doing something in the back room. Sometimes the intercom for the drive-through that our headsets are connected to would lock on open. Basically, the intercom would stay on as if a car had rolled up. Usually when the next car came through and the weight sensor was activated, it would correct itself when they pulled up to pay. But since it was late at night by this point, the customers were few and far between. The intercom had been locked on open for a while. It was a warm spring night, and the background noise of peep toads and crickets in the woods was a welcome distraction from the Dunkin radio station we had to listen to and couldn't turn off. But at one point, faintly, I began to hear voices through the intercom. I assume a car had rolled up and customers were talking amongst themselves in their vehicle, so I go to check the camera we have that's directly connected to the intercom. No car. I'm kind of puzzled, but haven't mentioned anything to Alice. Before I can, she comes out from the back and says, "Are you hearing this?" In a very definitive way. She already knew there wasn't a car without even checking. I wonder aloud if some kids were parked in the lot, so I open the back door, but the whole parking lot is empty. We listened to the voices for a while. It sounded like a couple women speaking to each other, but we couldn't make out anything specific. It was very faint, and we could still hear the crickets and peep toads too. I know that sometimes those intercom systems can pick up baby monitors or any radio station. However, although we were within sight of a few houses, we weren't super close to any of them. And the voices did not sound like any radio station chit chat, not even quiet NPR discussions. It just didn't have that cadence. The voices eventually faded out, but we both thought it was peculiar. We had tried to listen closely and make out what they were saying, but weren't successful. Probably lasted 10 to 15 minutes. The intercom malfunctioned and locked on open like that with some regularity, but that was the only time we heard anything besides customers and background noise. I worked there for about a year and a half. Story two. This one is much shorter. On this night, I was working with my other psychic-ish lady coworker who I'll call Victoria. Again, it was late in the night and we had locked the dining room and were going about our closing procedures. Victoria was in the back room prepping muffins to bake for the next morning. And I was in the front sweeping the dining room. I hear a woman's voice say something that I couldn't make out. And although it doesn't sound like Victoria, I look up expecting that she had asked me something. Only she's not there. I think it's weird and say, "Victoria?" A minute passes and she emerges in the doorway to the back room with a puzzled expression and says to me, "Did you just hear that?" And I simply say, "Yeah," with my eyebrows raised in surprise, hers furrowed, still puzzled. She puts up her hands and matter-of-factly says, "We're going to pretend that didn't happen." TLDR, worked at a Dunkin' Donuts late at night, out in the boonies, where myself and other coworkers heard disembodied women's voices, both on our intercom and in the building, on separate occasions. This story comes from r/paranormal from user apprehensive paint 90. When I was pregnant, me and my kid's father stayed at his cousin's house for about a month before we moved into our apartment. It's an old farmhouse in the newly developed area of Warwick, Rhode Island. There are farms and woods in one direction and a small town on the other. We were told when we moved in that the house had been built in the mid 1800s, which to me was super interesting until my kid's father, I'll call him Brian, remarked at how the stairs seemed awfully dark and creepy for the middle of the day. And when I looked, he was right. It gave off such a sinister vibe. We slept in the living room, and at night we could see through the kitchen, and it was as if the stairs became dark, uncomfortable void. When we brought this up to Brian's cousin and his wife, they proceeded to laugh and tell us stories of people being pushed down the stairs. I don't think they believed in ghosts, and the husband was an abusive drug addict, so they had enough problems, clearly. That house was chaotic. The husband and his wife clearly were having serious issues, emotionally and financially. They had a 6-year-old son who was afraid to sleep upstairs by himself because of the shadows that scared him. Great. After being in the house alone a couple of times and seeing genuine human figures out of the corner of my eye, or even better, black dots on the floor with what looked like long spindly legs running, but when you look at them straight on would disappear. A few times I would see a figure out of the corner of my eye, look and see one of the family members who I hadn't heard come in. I think that freaked me out the most because how can you explain to yourself seeing a person and sometimes nothing being there, but other times you expect it to disappear, but would in fact be a person standing there this time? So weird. Brian would say how sitting in one chair in the living room, you'd want to look over your shoulder into the doorway as if someone was coming down a set of stairs that used to be there. This also freaked me out, considering I slept right near the doorway and often would get a feeling of someone coming toward me. One day, me and Brian were the only two in the entire house, facing one another about 2 feet away, face to face, talking loud as we usually do. Directly in the middle of us, we heard a woman's voice say, "Shh." I asked if he had said that, and he stared at me with huge eyes and asked, "No, did you?" Then we laughed it off as we were clearly talking too loud for the inhabitants, apparently. We eventually brought this up to the family, who included a second cousin living upstairs, and they confirmed they too saw and felt things. They told us they assumed the black voids that ran on the floor were just one of their dogs and ignored it if it wasn't. The cousin who lived upstairs said the curtains to his closet often moved like they were being pushed, but he chalked it up to being stoned or tired. There was no breeze. The wife told me when they first moved there, her son would see a quote, man in a hat, end quote, but assume it was his imagination. How could you live in a house so clearly haunted and just pass it off? The front of the house at night was avoided by basically everyone, as it was right where it felt like someone was walking by the door frame at you in the living room. One night, I didn't feel like walking all the way around this huge house to the car, so I walked as fast as I could to the car through the front door. I heard a deep growling coming from the side of the house. They owned 3 dogs, one of which was a bull mastiff. Too freaked out to call for her, I ran, and to my horror, all 3 dogs were in the house. Needless to say, I didn't use that entrance again. It was such an emotionally depressing house, and maybe me being pregnant, I was just more aware of everything. But there were other weird things. One of the last conversations I had with one of my roommates renting a back bedroom, it was down a long hall at the very end, the only door in this isolated hallway. I told her about me and Brian hearing shh directly in the middle of us. She explained she hears the exact same thing in the hallway if she and her son were getting loud, but was sure it was the owner's young son sneaking through the hallway. I'm not so sure. Edit. I said late 1800s. I asked the homeowner to clarify, but it was actually built in the 1840s. So that brings us to the end of our ghostly tales. Um, hey, if you liked this video, this podcast, I would greatly appreciate it if you could gently press the subscribe button or the follow button if you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or even on YouTube and SoundCloud. You can reach us there. If you're not following me on Instagram, you can find me at weird_PVD. So always appreciate your support and love, and I really appreciate you tuning in to this episode of Weird PVD, the podcast. And don't forget, keep PVD weird.